I'm sure, Linda Knoll, Chairperson of Social Justice, and we've been talking for 3 or 4 years about what immigration would look like, just in general, and how would we go about learning more. And it really has to do with the 7 Catholic social teachings and the rights of our fellow people, rights of workers, a lot of rights. It really does affect a lot of this, or tie into a lot of the 7 Catholic social teachings. And we thought, well, maybe a good place to start was just local. What does immigration look like right here before we would even begin to think about branching out into the wider world? And so it seemed like a logical choice to contact Catholic Charities. They have an immigration legal service team that works on just that. So we brought Yer Vang in today so that we can all learn a little bit more.
Great,
so
thank you so
I'll let
much.
you go.
Yeah, thank you for the introduction. As Linda mentioned, my name is Yer Vang. I've been practicing immigration law for about 20 years. Hard to believe, and it's been it's a practice of law that's constantly changing, and I really want to emphasize that I think when you think about immigration, particularly just because it's been in the media the last several years, that when we think about as people of faith, whether Catholics or other denomination, it really is about there are some underpinnings of our Catholic social teaching that really inform us about why we should care about the topic of immigration. And so I'm always thrilled when I get invited to talk to groups, particularly our parishes and archdioceses. And so today I'm hoping I'll get a chance to talk to you a little bit about our Immigration Legal Services program with Catholic Charities, a little bit of an overview of our current immigration system, and also what can you do as faithful to really put faith in action into practice? Because oftentimes we think about really the guiding principle of welcoming the neighbor, right? But how does that happen? And how can you as an individual really participate in that process? And so I'm hoping that this is not just me standing up here and lecturing today. I encourage you to interrupt me, raise your hand, ask questions, because this is an opportunity for us to really have a dialogue and a conversation. I'm just here providing some background information. We all are experts, especially as neighbors, and how do we want to welcome our neighbor, right? Sometimes our neighbors are newly arrived neighbors. Sometimes our neighbors have been here for a very long time, but we just haven't gotten to know them. Right. So I oftentimes start off by talking a little bit about my own background and why I'm actually back here in Northeast Iowa. A little bit about myself. So I consider 1.5 generation American immigrant, in that my family came to the United States as refugees. So my family's from Southeast Asia, from Laos. And so right after the Vietnam War, my ethnic background and my family were individuals who helped the United States military in covert operations in the conflict in Vietnam. And a result of that, many of our people were persecuted and killed, so we fled our home country, Laos. And I actually was born in a refugee camp in Thailand. And with the grace of people of faith, like you and the Lutheran Church at that time, they sponsored my family, and we came to the United States, and we landed in lovely Decorah, Iowa, 40 some years ago. And so it's great to be back here in Northeast Iowa and to be able to work with, whether it's Catholic Church or the Lutheran Immigration Services is the program that brought our family here, but to be able to kind of be back and do a full circle and be able to help and give back to the community that once really welcomed my family as new neighbors into the community. So that's sort of a little bit of my story and why I'm very passionate about this topic, and not just for me with a personal story, but for you too, because this is part of you. Sometimes we forget that Iowa has a long, rich history of welcoming the neighbor. It really was former Governor Robert Ray, that was really a trailblazer in welcoming refugees in the late 70s. And because of his efforts and the people that worked with him, it really opened the doors for refugees, which now has led to our current immigration practice with respect to refugees and welcoming them into Iowa and into the United States. So don't forget that when you think about our rich history of welcoming our new neighbors, whether it's with respect to refugees or immigrants, okay? So a little bit about, I really often like to start off my presentation with this quote, right? This is the famous quote with the Statue of Liberty about, give me your poor, give me your tired, give me your poor, your huddled masses yearning to be breathe free, the wretched refuse of your teeming shores, send these, the homeless, the tempest-tossed to me. I lift my lamp beside the golden door. Right, so this really, we want to live up to this, and I think we are, and at times there may be some challenges, but I think as Americans, this is the goal that we try to live up to, which is to open our hearts and welcome those neighbors that are most vulnerable in our community. And this is a little bit, I think today what I really want to talk a little bit about is to start off with talking a little bit about who we are as Catholic Charities, our organization, and the type of services we provide. And then also to talk a little bit about an overview of the Immigration Legal Services system, right? So a little bit about Catholic Charities. Catholic Charities has been around since 1931. Our mission continues to be helping people and providing hope and creating that opportunity. But the actual type of programs have changed over the years depending on the needs of our community. So this is to give you an idea of where we are in terms of our coverage. So just because my office is located here in Cedar Rapids, we cover all of the archdiocese. So that's 30 counties in Northeast Iowa. I am the legal director, and I oversee 4 other immigration attorneys and 2 other paralegal staff. And so with that team, we cover as much as we can in our archdiocese. Our main office in terms of our Immigration Legal Services office is here in Cedar Rapids, but we also have an attorney in the Waterloo office as well as in the Dubuque office, Dubuque is our mother house office with the pastoral center associated with the Catholic Charities. And really, we are a social service agency that covers all 30 counties. And we provide our services to anyone that's in need, regardless of faith and regardless of their socioeconomic background, right? So when you come to us and ask for immigration legal services help, we screen to make sure you live in our archdiocese and that the service that you are seeking is something that we can offer, okay? I also want to make mention that in addition to our immigration legal services program, Catholic Charities also provides counseling, and especially in this last 18 months with the COVID and the pandemic, we've also offered telehealth options for those who may not be able to come to our counseling offices. We also provide affordable housing, mostly in our Dubuque County area. We have several properties in Dubuque. And then we also have our jail and prison reentry services. This is providing a support network for those that have been recently released from incarceration and reentering back into our community and making sure that they have a successful transition back into the community as well. And so the other thing that's related to what we currently do with immigration is also we provide a lot of support to our parishes and the community when it comes to disaster recovery services and disaster help, as well as seeking volunteers. And so that's another component that our Catholic Charities does participate in when there is a disaster, like a year ago with the derecho show, being able to help our communities and parishes with respect to the aftermath of natural disasters and looking for volunteers to assist with that process. So those are sort of an overview of the different services offered by Catholic Charities in all 30 counties, okay? Let's see here. So let's talk a little bit about, okay, what about immigration legal services? What is the immigration legal services that Catholic Charities offers? So immigration may seem complicated. It is complicated. It may seem just overwhelming. It is overwhelming. The thing that we do with Catholic Charities is our focus is about family-based immigration. So our focus is helping preserve families, keeping families together, and helping families reunify. And that is sort of one of our chief goals. And how do we do that? We do that by providing immigration services that help maintain and support those goals, right? And so in immigration, there are other avenues of immigration, such as employment-based immigration. And that, for example, is if you are Collins Aerospace and you want to hire some really skilled, highly skilled engineer from foreign countries to come work here. We don't do that type of immigration that's considered employment-based. And so our focus is really helping individuals who are refugees getting their lawful status and their citizenship. We help individuals who are fleeing their country and have arrived here and need protection, apply for asylum because it's unsafe for them to return back to the country of origin. We help people, as I mentioned, apply for their citizenship if they've been here at least 5 years or more. We also help a lot of folks who are dreamers. These are the young children that were brought here, and America is really their only home, and they probably speak English much better than perhaps their parents' native language. So that's our DACA program that we help individuals apply for. We also help individuals who have entered the United States and need to legalize their status with their green card applications, right? We also help individuals who are a United States citizen or have lawful permanent resident status, and they want to reunify with their parent or their child or their spouse that is abroad. And that's through our family-based reunification petition under the immigration system. We also assist individuals, particularly here in Northeast Iowa. For the last several years, we've seen a rise of unaccompanied immigrant children who arrive in Iowa. In Dubuque and Cedar Rapids, there are a large number of unaccompanied children who travel from Central America on their own and somehow miraculously are able to arrive here at our border and into the United States and need protection. And so those are our unaccompanied immigrant children who oftentimes need protection because they cannot return back home because either their parents are dead or they are fleeing their country and cannot go back. And the only option for the surviving parent is to say, child, the safest, even though it's difficult, is to send you to the United States and make your way up there and maybe join a sibling, an older sibling or an aunt and uncle, and perhaps be able to find safety. So that's our unaccompanied immigrant children program. We also help a lot of survivors of domestic violence and sexual violence with their legal immigration status, and that's through the Violence Against Women Act self-petition process, or what we call the U visa crime eligibility. If someone is a victim of, let's say, a domestic violence crime, potentially they could apply for immigration relief through this process, either through the U visa, or if they, and it's hard to believe, but if they happen to be victims or survivors of human trafficking, they potentially could apply for a trafficking visa to stay here and legalize their immigration status, okay? And the last there is removal defense. That's just a fancy legal term to call what we do immigration deportation defense. So we represent clients that are brought before immigration court. Immigration court is part of our federal system. So immigration court is in Omaha, Nebraska. So oftentimes when we represent clients before immigration court, we actually have to travel to Omaha, Nebraska with our clients and advocate on their behalf. So this is just a summary of immigration legal services that our program provides. And again, the focus is really family-based immigration, okay? This is just a flyer, and I just wanted to point out, if you didn't get a chance, if you entered up here, there's a table in the back. You'll see the Catholic Charities banner in the back. There's some flyers and brochures in English, Spanish, and French. Feel free to take one or several, and there's a couple notepads and pens. So I always like to say when I give out these and do these presentation, we have a little bit of a swag gift that you can take with you on your way out to remember us. And if you ever think of us, our phone number, contact information is on the brochures or the notepad. So feel free after their presentation to swing back there and pick up some brochures and pads, okay? Let's dive into what is immigration and what does our federal immigration system look like, right? So federal immigration, as it is it's federal. It's not local, it's not state, but it has a lot of state local implications. And I think the best time to be able to explain sort of how we as individuals connect with the federal institutions is to kind of lay out this flow chart so you see where oftentimes the work that we do intersect with federal agencies. So on the top, obviously, you've got the executive office, the White House, and then you have the federal agencies that we as immigration attorneys and immigrants may come into contact with, right? There are 3 federal agencies oftentimes that we come into contact with or work with or communicate with on behalf of our clients. The first on your left there is the Department of Justice. The Department of Justice oversees our immigration court, okay? So our immigration court, even though it says court, and it sounds like and oftentimes feels like close to criminal courts, it's not. It's not a federal court. It's not a federal criminal court. It's a federal, more than anything, I would compare it to maybe our bankruptcy courts that deal with a lot of procedures and policies and not so much criminal court, right? You've got the Department of Homeland Security, and that is really the federal agency that we deal with the most. And that is the agency that has the three branches that, as immigrants and immigration attorneys and practitioners, there is the first one called ICE. The acronym stands for Immigration and Customs Enforcement. This is the branch of the federal government that is responsible for detaining folks who may be here without permission. The second branch underneath the DHS is the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services. That is the federal branch of the government that is responsible for approving and adjudicating petitions like citizenship applications, DACA applications, green card applications, okay? And then the third branch underneath the DHS is our U.S. Customs and Border Protection. That is the agency primarily we hear of that is either at the southern or northern border. If you're entering at our ports of entry, like at our land entry, let's say maybe in Juarez or in nearby Tijuana, or in our northern border, that borders Canada, right? So those are federal agents that are responsible for making sure that people who are entering the United States have valid permission to do so, and they're not bringing in contraband or other illegal items as well. And then lastly, I wanted to point out the State Department, because the State Department is involved when we are helping individuals petition or bring their loved ones to the United States. So they have to go through what's called consular processing, and they have to actually set up interviews at our U.S. embassies, at foreign countries, and that's where the U.S. Department of State is responsible for overseeing those processes. Obviously, as you can imagine, with COVID and the pandemic the last 18, 19 months, things have really slowed down. This is the worst in my 20 years of practice in terms of extreme backlog in our immigration system. When we think about why people complain and have been actually separated from family members, it's because we have 1.7 million immigration cases that are in backlog in immigration court. That's just immigration court. We have 6 million plus applications or petitions that are in backlog with the U.S. Citizenship Immigration Services. So these are people who are applying for the work permits, people who are applying for their green cards and cannot get that, and they are waiting for over a year or more, right? And so when you think about that type of backlog, that just makes our job difficult, and the clients that we serve obviously anxious and worried for their loved ones who are especially living abroad and maybe living in really dangerous situations, or there's a civil war or strife that may make it more difficult, so they are concerned about their loved ones. So this is just an overview of the federal immigration system, okay? Oftentimes, I also get asked, well, if someone wanted to come to the United States, what are the pathways to come to the United States, or what are the pathways to get lawful status? And as I mentioned, right, the one that we, in our agency, is responsible for overseeing and working with clients is family-based immigration that I just mentioned, right? And then we also have something called Humanitarian Relief. Sorry, this slide here is. So Humanitarian Relief is something that you may be hearing quite frequently in the news these days. This is individuals who are applying for asylum because they can't go back to their country of origin because they're afraid of being persecuted or tortured or killed, right? This is also our special immigrant juvenile. This is the unaccompanied immigrant children that I talked about. And these are also people who maybe are fleeing their country, like in Haiti, where they've gone through not just a hurricane, but they've got earthquakes, and they cannot return back to their country of origin because it's unsafe or there's no ability. So the United States government may grant what's called temporary protection or temporary protected status for individuals from those countries to be here temporarily. There is, as it says, just temporarily, but temporarily could mean 10 years. It just means that there is no pathway for those individuals to get citizenship. It's just that the United States government has granted them temporary protection in the United States to live and work here for the time being, right? And then as I mentioned, DACA or our Dreamer or the children who are here. The other pathway to legal status is, as I mentioned, employment-based, right? So there are specific categories of employment and professions that are reserved for the employment-based categories. Particularly in Iowa, we have a large number of agribusinesses that really employ foreign workers, and they oftentimes rely on the employment-based category, like our H-2Bs and H-2As. These are for the agri workers, right? That maybe there's a company here, whether it's Tyson or some other agribusiness that have a hard time bringing or employing American workers. They have to prove to the federal government that there is a shortage of labor and that they need individuals from other countries to come in and fill that workforce gap. So that's employment-based, okay? The other question I get a lot is, well, these immigrants, you know, why don't they just get in line and do it like everybody else has done? Just get in line. The reality is there really is no line in immigration. Do you remember I talked about the backlog? So when you think about if you were in the situation, if you were living in a country like Haiti where you've had several natural disasters, the civil strife, or maybe a country like, unfortunately, like Burma or Myanmar, where the military has taken over, and you cannot leave your house because the military may then abduct you or kill you. When that is the life that you are experiencing, the perception of a line may not work. And so I like to remind folks that we'd like to have things orderly, and we'd like to make sure that it's fair for everyone. And we try to strive with that with our immigration system. Oftentimes, though, when our immigration system is broken and has not adapted the laws or the policies to fit the current needs and the current times, we have crises like what we do and what we've been experiencing in the last 10, 20 years. I say there's no real line available because the majority of immigrants have no route to legal status, like the three main legal pathways that I mentioned, whether they have to have a family member petition for them or they have to have an employer petition for them. And even if they fall into the humanitarian protection, there is, as you will talk a little bit later, situations like our Afghanistan allies who we just aren't able to accommodate that in the time frame that we would like to have a line. And so we have a situation where we have had to evacuate at really, really quick pace to be able to bring people to the United States into safety. And then what do we do with that process, right? And then many undocumented immigrants are barred from obtaining legal status because our immigration system prevents them from doing that because there are really strict rules about that, right? And even if you have an ability to maybe someone in the United States who's a family member petition for you, our immigration legal system is very strict about who we consider family and who we consider immediate relatives. I'll talk a little bit about that. Who's considered immediate relative is not what you think. It's not grandpa, it's not grandma, it's not your auntie, and it's not your uncle. And it's very limited to the individuals and the family relationships that the U.S. government allows you to bring to the United States, okay? And as I mentioned, most people who want to come to the United States and are seeking here, they do so because they have to. They have no other choice. It's not that they want to leave their country and their environment that they've known for years and years. They are doing so because they have to flee their home because there's war, there's poverty, there is strife, there is violence. And so the only safe pathway, unfortunately, is to try to figure out how do I get my family and myself some protection, and oftentimes they are looking at the United States as an avenue. So lastly, I wanted to make a point that even if, let's say, you're trying to do this the right way, right, in terms of the waiting in line. The last piece here is that, remember I talked to you a little bit about there are numbers of caps for visas available for employment base. There are also numbers of caps of visas available each year for family based too. So every year, if those visas have all been taken, you're going to have to wait until another year comes by and visas become available. And we'll talk a little bit about, sometimes you're talking about waiting 15 to 20 years. For example, in the United States, I'm a citizen. If I had a brother or sister that was still stuck in Laos or Thailand, and I wanted to petition for him or her, I'd have to wait 15 years to be able to reunite with my sibling. That's the current waiting period for a U.S. citizen to be reunited with their sibling. So when you think about 15 years, anything could happen in 15 years, right? And so when you are talking about those length of times, it makes it very, very difficult for families to be reunited and to be able to not be desperate when they're looking at 15 to 20 years in terms of waiting periods, okay? Let's talk a little bit about immigration definitions. Before I dive in, you'll hear me use a lot of acronyms. In our world, we use an alphabet soup. So as I mentioned, if you hear me use the term USC, that stands for United States Citizen. So the United States is a unique country in that itself, as well as maybe I think only 30 plus other countries allow for two ways in which you can become a U.S. citizen. Being born here, even if your parents are not citizen, and if one of your parents is a citizen, right? Most countries, you have to have a parent be a national or citizen in order for you to gain or acquire citizenship. But the United States is unique in that we offer those two routes to allow someone to become a citizen, right? So for myself, obviously I wasn't born here in the United States, and neither were my parents, and they were not citizens. But because I went through the immigration system, I was able to then apply for citizenship through our what we call naturalization process, okay? Alien, you hear that term a lot. That is an outdated term that needs to be updated, and I think under this new administration, I think President Biden has looked at ways in which to update that language, but it's still part of our the actual legislative code terminology. So aliens is really to signify anyone who's not a citizen of the United States, right? But we prefer the term non-citizen as alien. I think oftentimes it's easier to, I think, not consider people as human beings when we consider to call them aliens, right? So we think about green people from outer space rather than human beings that, bleed just like we do and have emotions and experiences. The other terminology, acronym, is LPR. It stands for Legal Permanent Resident. Oftentimes you'll hear the term green card holder too, or green card. When my family came to the United States, the actual card that we were issued was green, but now, 40-some years later, it's not green anymore. But it sometimes is still considered a green card. So if you hear the term LPR, or lawful or legal permanent resident status, that means someone who is here in the United States with legal permission to be here and live here indefinitely. But the caveat to that is they are still not protected from deportation if they violate immigration provisions. So you could be here in the United States for 30-some years and make a mistake under immigration law and potentially then face deportation, right? So that is the I think risk with just having lawful permanent residency status. I talked a little bit about immediate relatives of a United States citizen, and I'll go through that in a little bit about who's considered an immediate relative, right? And then son or daughter of a U.S. citizen, or LPR. The definition of child, a tandem definition here is United States government, when it pertains to immigration law, the definition of child is not what we would think here in terms of state law. Anyone who's under the age of 18 is considered a child or a minor. But under immigration law, the threshold for that is under the age of 21 and unmarried. Okay, so it's a little bit unique in that immigration federal law has a slightly different definition of who they considered a child. And then the other definition that's really important that I want to emphasize is, instead of using the term illegal alien, we often would like for people to consider when people enter the United States without inspection, EWI, I encourage folks to use the term undocumented, because these are individuals who are here and may not have the proper documentations. Oftentimes, the majority of people that are here in the United States actually entered the United States legally. I don't have a graph here, but research shows that in the last decade or so, the people that are here in the United States without documentation really are folks who entered with a visa, and they overstayed their visa for a number of reasons, right, as to why they can't go back to the United States or go back to the country of origin. The other document, or the other terminology you may hear me use, is employment authorization. This is EAD. This is oftentimes referred to as a work permit. People oftentimes, as foreign workers enter the United States, they may apply for and get what we consider an EAD, or work permit. And then the last terminology is IJ, immigration judges. These are the judges in our federal immigration court that oversee immigration cases. I just want to go over this quickly. We talked a little bit about immigrants, and you hear the term immigrant. But by definition, if you hear the term immigrant, it's a broad category. Immigrants, or immigrant, is really to signify anyone who's not a citizen in the United States that intends to make the United States their home. So it could be anyone who is undocumented. It could be someone who has lawful status. It could be someone who's here on a temporary status, like TPS holders or DACAs and Dreamers, okay? Lately, we've been hearing a lot of folks use the term, especially in our southern border, migrants. Migrants really signify individuals who are usually individuals making a voluntary decision to come to the United States and leaving their country of origin temporarily or permanently because they're seeking better opportunities, right? Whether that may be seeking out better opportunities out of poverty or violence. You may hear the term migrants being used. I talked a little bit about undocumented citizens, and usually the definition of why individuals may be considered undocumented. These are individuals who may overstay their visas or enter the United States without legal documentation, okay? I'm gonna also just review a little bit about refugees and asylees. This is an important terminology for you to be familiar with, because refugees are individuals that the United States government has already deemed as people who cannot stay in their country of origin and will enter the United States as refugees because they need protection. So refugee status is granted when they are abroad, okay, and they enter the United States as refugees. Individuals who are asylum seekers, or individuals who may have entered our country already and are physically here in the United States and cannot go back to their country of origin and are applying for protection or seeking protection while they're physically here in the United States, right? So definitions of refugees in the United States, particularly here in Northeast Iowa, in the last several years, we've seen a different kind of migration of refugees into Northeast Iowa, whether it's Southeast Asian refugees from Burma, whether it's refugees from Africa, particularly the Democratic Republic of Congo. Those are individuals who've already been deemed and been vetted very thoroughly. So when you think about refugees, that is one of the most extensive vetting categories that the United States engages in to make sure that when they allow people into the United States as refugees, like my family, we're vetted through multiple federal agencies, the United States government, and international agencies before we're granted permission to even step foot in the United States. Okay? Let's talk a little bit about, debunking some of the misconceptions that I oftentimes get asked is, well, if you're a spouse of a U.S. citizen, don't you just gain automatic citizenship by virtue of being married? That's not true. Oftentimes, even our own clients, they may come to us without even knowing that their immigration status is not what they think it is. They may say, well, my spouse is a U.S. citizen, so I should just be a citizen. No, you're not by nature just being married to a U.S. citizen makes you a U.S. citizen. You actually have to go through and apply for certain benefits and actually get screened and vetted and make sure that U.S. government thinks that you qualify for citizenship, right? And parents of U.S. citizens cannot obtain status through them until they're 21, right? So just because maybe your child is a citizen because they were born here doesn't make you automatically a citizen because your child is a citizen. the parent has to, every individual has to legalize their status and go through the naturalization process, right? And as it is, even for our DACAs and our Dreamer folks, there is right now no path from this temporary protection. Anytime these individuals, when I talk to a lot of DACA students that are in college, when their friends are out partying, having a good time, like, you can't do the same thing. The calculation, the risk that you have to take is very different than your American, roommate. Because if your American roommate goes out and maybe unfortunately has too much of a good time drinking and they go driving and they get into an accident, yes, they're going to deal with the criminal repercussions or potential legal repercussions of that. But if you do that, you're not just dealing with the legal repercussions with the state law, but you're also dealing with immigration repercussions, meaning you could get deported. So the calculations for our Dreamers are very different, not just Dreamers, but individuals who are not citizens, right? I also like to, spend a little bit of time talking about, resources on immigration. And where can you get resources in this age of too much social media? It's hard to determine what's a reliable source of information. This list is by no means an exhaustive list. This is just a list that I oftentimes turn to when I want to go get accurate information or information that can help inform me, so that when I have conversations with parishes across the Archdiocese, we talk about this. So for attorneys who practice immigration law, we belong to a national chapter called the American Immigration Lawyers Association. There's a local state chapter here for Iowa and Nebraska immigration attorneys that we belong to, that updates us on changing laws and rules and federal regulations and case law. The second is a really good source. It's a national organization, nonprofit, called American Immigration Council, that points out and puts out together really helpful advisories and fact sheets about immigration that is helpful for a non-legal or non-attorney to review and read. So it's a really great resource too. Another one is the Immigrant Legal Resource Center. That's a national nonprofit. And then of course, we are also members of the Catholic Legal Immigration Network. That's our national chapter umbrella that we provide, that we actually receive technical legal assistance from. So CLINIC is the acronym that we oftentimes refer to. But they also have attorneys on staff and provide a lot of networking and legal immigration that we refer to. And then of course, the federal government's website, the USCIS, that provides updates and information about the different changing forms and regulations regarding immigration applications and petitions. Another, in terms of research, more research-bent resource that I would encourage you to take a look at is the Pew Research Center, as well as the Migration Policy Institute. These are all nonpartisan organizations that provide really good research information and background. So whenever I'm doing, let's say, research on a particular issue, I do oftentimes refer to these two organizations that provide a lot of data, that's longevity data in terms of how things have looked in the last 10, 20 years with respect to migration trends. So those are just some information and resources that I would encourage you to consider if you're ever looking to do some research or just review on the topic of immigration, okay? And what I'll do is, if folks are interested, I'll make sure, Linda, to maybe send you some copies of these slides so that if people want it, they can refer to this, so they don't have to remember this. So, in addition to just, immigration, right? How can you, as individuals, get involved? I really use this as an opportunity to encourage people to think about, well, how can I get involved? I'm just me. What can I do? There are so many things that you can do, right? But especially here, especially these days, we're fortunate that we have organizations like Catholic Charities and a whole host of other nonprofit organizations in Iowa that really work on immigrant rights and immigration issues. So if you don't have time, but you have, the ability to donate, whether it's $5 or $10 or $100, donate to, nonprofit organizations that do this work, like Catholic Charities or other organizations, right? And if you have time and want to volunteer, contact organizations like ours, because we're always seeking volunteers to see if there are different opportunities to plug you in, especially if you're interested in volunteering with our Immigration Legal Services Program or our jail prison ministry, or whether it's one of our other programs that we can plug you into. And I'll talk a little bit about some actually current volunteer opportunities that that is happening right now. We'll talk a little bit about that with the Afghan refugees that are here in the United States. Sometimes when we talk about volunteering, different organizations provide literacy or tutoring refugees and immigrants. So here, for example, nearby, not here in Mount Vernon, but just in Cedar Rapids, there's the Catherine McCulley Center that provides literacy and tutoring for refugees and immigrants and newly arrived Americans. Another huge barrier for immigrants and refugees is they may not have a driver's license or they may not have a car. So transportation is a huge issue, especially with our clients, especially with our kids. And I call them kids, but our young immigrant children who need to get to their medical appointments, to come to our appointments with us, or to go to immigration court. They can't drive. And so we're always looking at ways in which to seek people in the community who can volunteer and drive them from Cedar Rapids or wherever they live to immigration court and back, right? The other thing I want to make a plug for is maybe you're an empty nester and your kids are off and you have time and you could serve as a legal guardian for one of the children that I mentioned, one of the immigrant children. We are seeing not a sudden surge, but in the last 5 years, we've seen an uptick of immigrant children who need guardians, because in order for the immigrant children to receive immigration protection, they have to actually go through state court and be assigned and designated a legal guardian so that they can then be eligible to petition for the federal immigration benefit, right? And so the legal guardian is not necessarily to terminate the person's parental rights, but really serving as a navigator here in the United States or here in Iowa, because maybe they don't have their parents, or maybe they have one parent, maybe their mom here, but their mom doesn't have legal status, so they need a legal guardian to make sure that the child will be enrolled in school, that they, if they need medical appointments, that they get to the medical appointments and get those set up. Not that the child has to live with them or that they are financially or legally responsible, but really the legal guardian, for all intents and purposes, we're like a big brother or big sister to this immigrant child. And so that's something that we're constantly, also keeping an ear and eye out for anyone who's interested in serving as a legal guardian. Yes, question.
So what age are you seeing these children? When you say children, it's broad age.
It's broad age, and for state guardianship, they have to be under 18. So many of our clients, we have clients as young as, actually, I just interviewed a mother and a daughter. The daughter is 1.5 years old, and that daughter needs a guardian. And we also have 16-year-olds and 17-year-olds who are going on 26, 27, because that's just the nature of their upbringing, because they've had to be adults so much quicker, right? So we're looking, we represent children who are as young as 1.5 to 18 or 19, but generally under our immigration law, it considers anyone who's a minor or child under the age of 21, but specifically for the immigration protection relief that I'm talking about with the special immigrant juvenile, under our Iowa state law, to be considered a juvenile, you have to be under 18. So many of our clients are 18 and under, and many of those children are 18 and under. So they arrive at our offices, 2, 3, 4, 16 years old, and we try to explain the immigration process to them, and it's overwhelming. Even for English native speakers, to explain the legal process is overwhelming, but to do so in a different language. I don't speak Spanish, so we're very fortunate that we have 2 bilingual paralegals in our office that speak Spanish. We have another staff that speaks French and Swahili and Lingala, so we are fortunate to have interpreters help interpret and provide language accessibility for those clients. But that is a huge need that we're seeing here in Lynn County and Northeast Iowa. Yes, question?
Thank you very much for coming. Obviously, I've learned a whole lot of stuff that I didn't know. Can you just touch on 2 things? Just give us a brief definition of chain migration, and also just speak briefly about how the immigration process has changed since September 11th in terms of coming and going out of the country?
Yes, good question. Question is, explain a little bit about chain migration and explain about the changes in immigration after 9/11. Chain migration, we've heard that terminology quite a bit in the last few years. I really think it's a misnomer because chain migration really kind of speaks to, well, if you have one person on foot anchored in the United States, then anybody that I want to bring can come to the United States, right? The reality, that's not true. Our immigration system restricts who's eligible to come to the United States if it's related to a family member through the family-based process. Immigration only allows, if you are a U.S. citizen, for you to petition for your mom or dad, for your children under the age of 21. If they're over 21 and married, they can come, but they have to be put into what's called a preference category. So that means they're going to have to wait a long time. And then third, you can only petition as a citizen, children, as I mentioned, children, and the other category is parents, spouses, and children as a U.S. citizen. You can petition for older children, as I mentioned, but they're going to be in the preference category. They're going to have to wait a long time. The other category as a citizen that I can bring is, as I mentioned earlier, siblings, but that's about it. So that's the definition of what we consider relatives under our federal immigration system. So auntie and uncle that I have a really close relationship with and maybe I see as sort of my second mom or second dad, auntie and uncle do not qualify for chain migration. There's no such thing. Gramps and grandpa, pop-pops, we can't petition for them, right? And so when we think about, you know, our own families and who we consider part of our family, the federal immigration system does not define family in the same way, right? So I think chain migration is really, you know, a disservice to understanding immigration process. It's quite restrictive. You can, as a citizen, only bring those individuals that I just mentioned: spouses, children, and your parents. You can bring siblings if you're a U.S. citizen, but then that's going to take a very long time, right? Because that falls into what we consider a preference category as well. So that's really to underscore that there really is no chain migration. For me, I can't bring 20 of my, you know, cousins to the United States, even if I am really close and I grew up with them.
That's really a false term.
Right, right. The other question you had was, what has changed under after 9/11? Remember the slide that I showed you earlier? Let me see. That gives you a graph of really the federal immigration system, the different federal agencies, right in the beginning. This Department of Homeland Security did not exist prior to 9/11. In 2003, President Bush did away with what was formerly called INS. Do you remember that? If you've been around long enough, it was called INS, Immigration Naturalization Services. After 9/11 and in 2003, INS turned into Homeland Security, and that is the really the legacy of 9/11 is the increased vetting through ICE. Really, the enforcement piece has been really, I think, increased under our federal immigration system. We had it before through our customs border, but it wasn't as targeted and underneath the same umbrella agency. So post 9/11, the creation of Department of Homeland Security is what has happened since then. And of course, terminologies have changed too. But I want to go back to Department of Justice and Immigration Court. Immigration court, as I mentioned, sometimes we think of immigrants, well, they're in immigration court, so they must have done something illegal. Not necessarily. Immigration court is violations of civil administrative immigration law. Immigration law is administrative law. It is not criminal law. So even though they may be treated and seen as, quote, defendants or in immigration court like criminals, most immigrants that are in immigration court or most immigrants that are here in the United States do not commit crimes. If they commit crimes, they are prosecuted through the criminal federal courts, right? And then they get referred to immigration court. But anything in immigration court generally is about violations of immigration law. And immigration law is not criminal law. Immigration law is similar to administrative violations. right? So that is something that I want to make sure that people understand, is that just because someone may be apprehended by ICE, Customs Enforcement, and they are apprehended or arrested, it sounds criminal, right? The process of arresting someone and detaining them, those are terminologies we use in the criminal law context. But these are all violations under civil immigration law and not criminal law. If you get caught crossing the border, that's an illegal criminal act, and there are criminal violations or criminal consequences of that. Then you go through criminal federal court to get prosecuted for that. So that is a criminal act, right? The act of crossing the border illegally if you get caught. Question?
An example of immigration courts.
Mm-hmm.
Give me an example.
An example of immigration court for,
Or what you said.
Yeah.
Violation.
so violations, so if,
Violation.
yep, so if, let's say, I'm not a citizen, let's say I have a green card, and I make a stupid mistake by drinking and having a good time and get pulled over and get arrested, and this is like my third violation of DUI. So I may get my license suspended, but because I'm not a citizen, I may then trigger what's called immigration violation, because I've violated my agreement as a person here to comply with immigration law. I may then be flagged by immigration to say, Zer, you've been naughty, you've been not just you haven't been upholding to your agreement to be an upstanding individual. So not only will you go through the criminal state court for being held accountable for maybe drinking and driving, you violated your civil immigration rule to say that you're not going to engage in those activities, and you've done it 3 times. You're now going to be triggering what we call deportation removal. So I may become removable, and I may actually flag and get the attention of ICE, and ICE may say, hey, sir, you've been in jail for 6 months because you were caught drinking and driving. This is your 3rd violation. You're a repeat offender. We're going to pull you into immigration court. You have to now defend yourself and explain to the immigration judge why you deserve to stay in the United States, or we're going to deport you back to your country of origin. So it's really tricky, because it sort of almost sounds like double jeopardy. Wait, I committed a crime, I did a bad thing, but I served my time in jail, but why am I now back in court with immigration court dealing with the same thing, right? So it feels really confusing when it comes to those things. So driving under the influence is a big trigger. Drug possession is a big trigger to get you into immigration court. Obviously, being undocumented and not having lawful documentation will get you into immigration court, right? Because you're going to have to defend yourself and explain why you deserve to be here in the United States. A lot of individuals who unfortunately are domestic violence abusers may find themselves in immigration court if they've been a defendant in the criminal. So anytime you are a defendant in our state criminal system, it's likely that the immigration court, if you are not a citizen, you'll find yourself interacting with immigration court, because that is the civil immigration consequences. Yeah.
So if you had to put a number on that population, so it sounds to me like that population is quote unquote at risk.
Yeah.
For that. So just, do you have a ballpark number on a national level of who fits that criteria?
Well,
That's probably
it's hard to do, but here's what I would say. Anyone in the United States who's not a citizen is going to be at risk for ending in immigration court if they end up, unfortunately, interacting with the criminal justice system, right? So that could be anyone who is lawfully here in the United States with a green card, anyone who has received refugee status.
So the notion of the green card is like your armor.
It's your first layer, right?
Yeah.
But it doesn't
Easily
fully
broken.
protect you. It's not it's not like you've got maybe an armor, but it may not be as good as a Kevlar
Right.
armor to protect you from.
Yeah.
But the reality is that we have a lot of people here in the United States who are undocumented because they've come here legally and overstayed. So that's what the average, they're saying, research says about 10, 11 million. And then you also have folks who are here legally but are not citizens, so they could be at risk for finding themselves in immigration court, right? But right now, as we see it, you know, there are, as I mentioned, 1.7 million cases in immigration court. And that's just active court cases. That doesn't include potentially anyone like from here going on out that may find themselves in here. So we need a better system to handle, you know, what I would consider civil violations of immigration law without sticking them into immigration court, because that just clogs it up. Let's leave immigration court to dealing with individuals who have, I think, more severe types of cases that should be heard before an immigration judge. So it's hard to estimate, because it could be today, this year, you could talk about X number of millions, and then, you know, next year, if there's changes in the law, it could even be more or less, right? So it's a hard number to pinpoint. But when you think about it's a lot, because when you think about people who are here undocumented and people who are here legally but without citizenship status yet, that's a lot of people. Yeah. So question back there. Yep.
What happens
Jeannie.
if you are the parent that commits the crime and you have a minor child that's born in the U.S.?
Yep.
Does your child go get deported potentially?
Yeah, Jeannie, that's a great question. So the question is, what if you are not a citizen, but you have a child who was born here that's a citizen, and let's say you commit a crime and you are facing deportation in immigration court? What happens? Two options, really, for the parent. You leave that child here with someone that you trust that can care for their child, or you bring that child back with you if you are deported back to your country of origin. And that oftentimes is what we see is, obviously, if you can imagine, if you were a parent and you had a child and you were found to be removable, or that the United States government was going to deport you back to your country of origin, would you want to leave your child here? Most likely, most people would take their child with them to go back to their country of origin. So it could be both ways, because that child has his or her own legal status. It's just the caretaking and upbringing if you're absent. What do you do, right? And oftentimes, not a lot of people have the luxury of, I have a relative that I trust that can, you know, take care of this child until this child turns 18 and can be an adult. Yeah, those are hard questions, because we deal with those all the time. I had a consultation just this week, the 1.5-year-old. The mother is undocumented, but the child, you know, was born in Guatemala, and they just arrived 6 months ago. What do we do if the mom gets deported? There's potential legal relief for that child, because that child may qualify for one of those protections, but the mom, if she doesn't win her asylum case, she may be deported, right? And then at that point, she's going to have to make a decision of whether I take my child with me or leave my child here. So those are hard questions that we have with many of our clients a lot. Yeah. I don't know what's my timing, Linda, if I have... Let me just, let's see, I think I only had a couple slides left here to talk about things in which you can get involved. I wanted to make sure that I got to this one, which is volunteer opportunities that's so timely, unfortunately, is you've probably heard since August with the evacuation of Afghans out of Afghanistan. It was such a complete, you know, unexpected event that there were thousands of Afghanistan individuals that were airlifted out of Afghanistan. I think they averaged between 60 to 70,000 people were airlifted, and we have about 60 to 70,000 people that are at different military bases in the United States right now that are from Afghanistan. The closest military base that is processing Afghan individuals is in Fort McCoy. We, the United States Catholic Conference Bishop, has taken the lead on Afghanistan processing individuals, and so we're partnering with, they have partnered with the local La Crosse Catholic Charities and La Crosse Diocese to process and help provide humanitarian relief to the Afghan nationals and guests that are staying at Fort McCoy military base. And so we as Catholic Charities in Dubuque are coordinating with the La Crosse Catholic Charities to recruit and encourage people who would like to volunteer to contact us if you're interested in volunteering. We are asking for, there are two ways you can volunteer, right? We talk about donation. There are, whether it's Amazon or Walmart or Target, there's different gift registries, especially now that we're gonna get our first kind of solid snow in the next few weeks. Folks may need gloves and coats and boots, and they don't have those. So they literally just arrived with the clothes on their backs and have no other amenities. The military base is providing for their basic amenities, food and shelter, but individuals that are staying there at Fort McCoy may need some additional basic necessities. So you can go onto the registry, go onto the La Crosse Catholic Charities website, and they will have different links in which you can donate items through these different registry. They do not want you to send things to the military base because the military base has different ways of processing vetting, so that they prefer that you go through the Catholic Charities of La Crosse's registry. The other way is if you have time and you have at least a week or two that you would like to volunteer in person, we are helping to process volunteers at the end of this month. After Thanksgiving, myself and my legal assistant will be at Fort McCoy for a week volunteering in their legal center. They are in need of individuals. They have a women's center, a men's center, children's center, and a learning center, and a legal center. So they're in need of, obviously, immigration attorneys to help with individuals applying for asylum and getting their immigration paperwork ready. But they also need, especially sewing is a huge popular activity with the Afghan women. There's just not enough volunteers to be on site to help with the sewing center, with the women's center. The children, there are 5,000 children at the military base in Fort McCoy, and they would love for people to go there and help keep the children engaged, because they're just on the base. There isn't a whole lot to do, especially with winter coming. It'd be great to get volunteers to volunteer and keep the children engaged. The Men and Women's Center also need people who could probably tutor or teach and do different activities with them. So I would encourage you to think about it. The volunteer opportunity is going to be from now until probably throughout March, because they're anticipating that without 13,000 people on the base, it's going to take a while to process and vet those individuals and get them to refugee resettlement agencies like Catherine McCauley to be resettled in different communities in Iowa, as well as in other parts of the United States. So if you're interested in learning more about this, please go to our Catholic Charities Dubuque.org website. We've got a big box that says Fort McCoy Volunteer Opportunity, and you can click on that and sign up to be a volunteer, or if you want to, you can donate and go to one of the links, and it'll tell you where to go. Yes, question?
I have some Afghan money. Where can I give it?
You have some Afghan money? That's a good question. Currency, actual
Yeah,
currency?
currency.
Yeah, it probably wouldn't be useful. So that's a great question. I don't know. I mean, unfortunately, you could maybe go and exchange it for US dollars and then donate it to the Catholic Charities in La Crosse. That might be the way to do it.
And have it exchanged.
Gosh, anyone here knows? You might have to go to banks.
You might want to
Yeah.
try, well, I don't think Cedar Rapids has a currently, an airport would be the,
Maybe Wells Fargo.
Maybe try Wells Fargo. I mean, banks that are large,
Then
national.
I will give it to
The La Crosse, yeah, Catholic Charities in La Crosse, or Catholic Charities. I know we've been asked to collect monetary donation, but unfortunately, we don't have the capacity to accept that at the moment. I think we're working with Archbishop and our executive director to figure out if we should take in monetary donations and then send it, because we know that the other thing is when those 13,000 or 60,000 individuals are resettled across the United States, they're going to need housing. Housing is going to be a huge issue. So the other option is if there's 4 or 5 of you that want to get together, or organization or church or parish wants to get together and provide housing for Afghan refugees, that is going to be a huge need. So there's resources. U.S. Catholic Conference and Bishop has been trying to figure out how to provide financial assistance to organizations or communities, because there is just not enough traditional refugee resettlement agencies across the United States to help resettle and vet and provide housing for the 60,000+ individuals. And so communities like Mount Vernon, Lisbon, who may have empty Catholics, schools or empty properties that can be converted into housing. I think that's something that I was just on a conference call this week too with USCCB, and they are talking about communities across the United States that might be able to come together and provide housing for Afghan refugees once they are resettled into communities across the U.S. So if you're interested in that, I'm happy to send that information to Linda, and she can forward it to the Social Justice Committee and to the parish chair. But that is going to be a huge need that I see coming in the next months to come for Afghan nationals.
So my question is, we've heard that there's 250 Afghan refugees coming soon.
Yes.
Who is the contact point? Is it Catholic Charities or the Catherine McCauley Center?
Yeah,
If
so
you are so inclined to get involved and try to help, where do you start?
So
to-
this is hard because we as Catholic Charities has been doing refugee resettlement for 70 some years, and then under the previous administration there was a huge reduction and cut in refugee admissions, so our refugee program has been dissolved. So Catholic Charities no longer has an official refugee resettlement program. So Catherine McCauley Center is the only organization in Northeast Iowa dealing with helping with the 250 Afghan refugees that will be coming to Northeast Iowa. So if you're specifically interested in volunteering with those 250 Afghan refugees and working with Catherine McCauley Center, that's the point of contact I would reach out to. If you're interested right now in volunteering, these are the opportunities that you could also do, and you could do both, because the thing about this situation with the Afghan refugees and Afghan nationals is that it's going to take some time to resettle and vet people to make sure that they are placed in the right community, that they have all the immigration documentation that they need. And so there are things that you can do right now. There are things that you can do in several months' time. So good question. Yes?
You mentioned Catherine McCauley Center. Of course, I'm active working there as a tutor now for language. And I don't know if anybody in the group here is interested in it. Hopefully you might be. And maybe some of you are doing it already and I don't know it. But I've been doing it for almost 3 years. And it's a great experience. And if you want to help at Catherine McCauley Center, they're looking for tutors.
Great.
Anybody can tutor. If you know English, you can tutor. So
Yes.
It's easy. They have all the help you need.
Yep.
Booklets that you name it.
Yes.
And it's
Thank
and
you for saying that.
People are so appreciative
Yep.
of any help you can give them. It's just amazing.
I couldn't agree more. Even if you could, donate 5 hours a week or whatnot. How many times do you meet with your student?
I spend Thursday morning.
Yep.
Working with students.
Yep.
And it's set up. Not because of COVID. Everything had to change.
Yeah.
They're in a new building now.
Mhm.
Because of derecho, there were a lot of
Yep.
issues there. But at any rate, a brand new building.
Yeah.
And training rooms where you teach with the
Exactly.
individual students.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
it works really quite well. And I say
Right.
you can teach, anybody can teach. High school kids can teach people. If you
Exactly.
know
Yeah.
It's
That is the thing about volunteering, whether it's with Catherine McCauley or with Catholic Charities, that do not underestimate your skill set. If you're able to dedicate a few hours a week, those are precious few hours that could be given to another refugee or immigrant that could use your time with, practicing English, practicing, language skills, or donating, driving someone to an appointment. Those are things that were, in my line of work, even as an attorney, I feel like most of the time I feel like a social worker. They can come to us for their legal immigration question and we can deal with that, and then I get asked, well, I need diapers for my child, or I need clothing for my child, or where do I go because I've got a toothache and I don't know where to go for a dentist, or we can't pay our utility bills this month, or our rent bill, right? So those are things that I feel like, even as Catholic Charities immigration attorneys, we feel like social workers more than anything. So those are questions, that we get asked. Mm-hmm.
Are people allowed, that are immigrants, allowed and able to work here while they're trying to become?
So the question is, are immigrants allowed to work here while they're here? Well, yes and no, depending on your immigration status. So if you have legal status and you have legal permission to work, yes. you can work here in the United States. That's the EAD, or the work permit card that I had referenced earlier in terms of definition. If someone qualifies for it and is eligible, they can apply for that and then be able to work legally in the United States. But oftentimes, there are many people here that work without legal permission as well, right? And so one of the things that we found with COVID and this pandemic is now there's a shortage of labor, right? And where do we find labor to staff, especially the, restaurant and food industries, or particularly big agribusinesses like Tyson, and even some of the meat packing that were truly impacted by COVID. They're all, the workforce is refugee and immigrant based, and they all have legal status to work, but if what we've been experiencing with COVID, people get sick and can't return back to work, there's going to be a shortage of labor, and that's going to impact all of us, indirectly. Yes, question.
So my understanding regarding advocacy is that there's been three major times where advocacy has worked in the United States. Number one is the Cuban refugees. A huge amount of money was invested in that population, and you got the physicians and the attorneys and the teachers and the professors up to speed quickly. They integrated. The other folks were, as you said, the Southeast Asian folks came into the country. There was a lot of advocacy for that, and I know that goes on in other countries as well. Denmark is another place that took a lot of folks and really got them up to speed. And the other is the Soviet Jews, where there was a huge advocacy that went on for those folks to come in and work, not just at the lower level jobs, but also at the higher level jobs. There was a lot of training and money spent. But the rest of the time, the system just broke.
What we have is a really outdated immigration system, and that's why, we, even as part of the larger Catholic Conference and the bishops, have really, this is great timing. Your question couldn't be more. I was going to touch on this too, is advocacy. What can we do right now? We need comprehensive, compassionate immigration reform to change the rules and regulations of our immigration system so that it responds to our current needs, whether it's labor, economics, or just people, right? And so that is why right now, we're all like tired and exhausted of hearing about, the Build Better Back and the infrastructure and the reconciliation, all that stuff that's happening in DC. But the reason why you should track it and you should be engaged and care about it is because the reconciliation bill that's being under consideration right now as part of the Biden's administration with the Build Better Back Act is that there are immigration provisions in that bill that should not be stripped away, because if we strip that away, what you're talking about is really common sense immigration provisions. This isn't even comprehensive immigration. This is just plugging Band-Aids so that we actually have something that makes sense. Is creating provisions that will allow us to legalize individuals or give them a legal pathway to legal status for the 7 to 8 million people who can stay here and work here legally, so that we don't have a broken immigration system. So right now, under consideration, contact your senators and contact your representatives to encourage them to consider now, the version of the immigration bill that started, they're now on Plan C. So Plan C is basically allowing for the 7 to 8 million people, and this includes our agribusiness workers, right? These are the employees that are working at our dairies and our meat packings and our pig farms, to really get legal status so they can work and maintain our infrastructure and food supply system. That's what this really is about. So contact your senators and legislators and ask them to support the immigration provisions under the reconciliation bill that's part of the Build Better Back BBB Act, so that we have some type of immigration relief for those millions of people that really support our infrastructure and our ecosystem here in the United States. Because if we have a shortage of labor force, that means all of us are going to be impacted, whether we like to believe it or not. In very little ways or in big ways as well. Whether we go to the grocery store and see that milk is now not $3, but it's $5 or maybe even more now, right? So these are things that impact our lives as well. Yeah. So with immigration system, there's different waves of immigration. what we need to do is be responsive to the different waves and the different needs of our labor. If nothing else, I always encourage people that, you know, immigrants make sense, and sense in terms of CENTS, economic value and the labor force and the revenue that immigrants bring to the United States is more than what they take. We could spend a whole day talking about that piece of it, but for today, I just want to leave you with the thought that if you want to get involved, there are so many ways to get involved, but the first important thing is thank you. You are here today, this morning, because you all could go back home and snuggle up and stay warm and not think about this, but the fact that you're here and spending an hour with me and chatting with me is a huge step. So I want to thank you for your attention and time, and please feel free to reach out to us at Catholic Charities anytime. If you're interested in volunteering, donating, just have questions, or if you want to do something even more beyond just this presentation, we'd be happy to chat with any of you. Okay? That's all I have. Thank you so much.